glass door there, the stairs. We walk through the stairs down, following a line course, go through the reception. The assembly point is in front of the hotel. Thank you very much, and thank you once more for using us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are going to start, so first let me greet you. Good morning, goeiemorgen, dumelang, molweni. My name is Tembani Bukula. I would be the chairperson of this session. Normally we have 4 other members that form part of this panel, but unfortunately today either they were traveling or there were traveling issues from Johannesburg, so you are stuck with me. I will be your chairperson for today. So welcome to the public hearing on Eskom's multi-year price determination number 6. This is a revenue application for the financial years 25-26 right up to 27-28. This hearing was duly advertised as it's required by the National Energy Regulator Act, and it was advertised in the Sowetan, the Rapport, the National Independent Newspapers, the Sunday Times, the Business Day, the national radios, at the NESA website, and the different social media. It is held in accordance with the National Energy Regulator Act. The National Energy Regulator Act requires that before NESA makes a decision, all affected parties must be given an opportunity to present facts, evidence, and their views before NESA makes a decision. And it is in that vein that this hearing is being held. The hearing is also governed by the NESA rules, and there are many pages of them, but I will just summarize them as follows. That all of the presenters that are going to present are required to do their presentation under oath, and presenters other than those that have asked for additional time have been given 15 minutes to present. So if you are an organization or members of the public and you have registered, so you have 15 minutes to present, so we can use as many presenters as you want as long as it's within those 15 minutes. Now, as this is a public hearing of the energy regulator, it's the energy regulator only that can ask questions. In this particular case, I'm going to be the only person that can ask questions to the presenters. However, because we do want this to be as inclusive as possible, we would allow that those who want to ask questions can write the questions down, give them to Mr. Mabunda. I don't see him here, he's over there. And Mr. Mabunda would forward them to me, and I will read them out or decide otherwise if they are not appropriate to be read out. Now, should any of the presenters want to present information that is confidential, that presenter would have to indicate, and if we deem the information they are going to present confidential, we'll then clear the room, that request you that you leave the room. All of the presenters must speak through the microphones, including the one that I'm speaking on, and the official record of this public hearing will be the recordings through these microphones. As we start, I'm going to request that those who have cell phones, if you could put them on mute or silent, and request that as the presenters are presenting, if you could give them the respect that they require and deserve, and not disturb them by making any noises that may disturb the presenter. We have received 9 requests to present, and I think in the program that you've received there may be a missing presentation by the DA, which we will have just after NUMSA. As I indicated that all of the presenters would have to do their presentation under oath, we are then going to start our hearing with the very first presenter, the applicant. The applicant has required or requested that they would present for a longer period, so it's not going to be 15 minutes for the applicant. And I will then ask Eskom to come forward. Thank you. start, may you please raise your right hand and affirm, do you solemnly declare that the evidence you are going to give to this panel is the truth and the whole truth?
I do.
Thank you. For the record, please state your name, your designation at ESCOM.
My name is Snehal Nagar, and I'm the finance business partner for Primary Energy.
Thank you. And may you please raise your right hand and affirm, do you solemnly declare that the evidence you are going to give to this panel is the truth and the whole truth?
I do, Chair.
Thank you. For the record, please state your name and your designation at ESCOM.
My name is Eric Shanmugam. I'm the General Manager in Generation.
Thank you. You may start with your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, members of the public. Thank you for affording us the opportunity to present to you. Just want to get my bearings. If I can start. So basically, ESCOM's multi-year, or the MYPD period comes to an end at the end of 31 March 2025. So ESCOM's revenue application is guided by the electricity pricing policy, the Electricity Regulation Act, and NERSA's MYPD methodology. ESCOM has motivated this application using the latest projections available. We have considered the impact on the consumers with regards to the application by phasing in the return on the assets for migration towards cost reflectivity. When we look at the mechanisms that ESCOM's has in place, there are many factors. It's not only the cost reflectivity that needs to be in place, but there are many other factors that need to be in place to ensure the sustainability of ESCOM and the sector. One of them is a core pillar is the cost reflectivity of the tariff. The other one is the balance sheet support from the government. Another factor or key pillar is ESCOM's efficient costs. So efficient, and it's important to understand the efficient cost that ESCOM has put forward in the application, and what's also in ESCOM's direct control from a cost management perspective. Important to also that underpins the financial sustainability of ESCOM is the revenue that ESCOM needs to collect for the electricity that it bills out. So these pillars all need to be together in place for the financial sustainability of ESCOM, or to enable the sustainability of the service. So when we look at ESCOM's application, it is for efficient costs. That's a requirement in terms of NERSA. NERSA makes its assessment only on efficient costs, and a key pillar that ESCOM continues to address is fraud and corruption, and the company has put many measures in place and continues to put measures and controls in place to address corruption and fraud. So when we look at the ESCOM application, the application is done in terms of a formula. This is a formula that is in terms of the NERSA MYPD methodology, and it stipulates how ESCOM's revenue requirement is determined. Now, when we put this formula or when we look at this formula in terms of the application, what you see is this is the outcome of that particular formula in arriving at ESCOM's revenue determination. Important maybe to highlight here is that you can see the return on assets that ESCOM has applied for is not at its weighted average cost of capital or required return, but actually a migration towards a cost reflective tariff and a path. So ESCOM's put in the application a return of 4, 5 and 6% over the 26, 27 and 28 period. The other sort of key aspects of the application is the primary energy costs, which include coal, OCGTs, the international purchases included, and you can see the quantum of in the application is now the IPPs that are now coming into the electricity sector and into the electricity mix, carbon tax, a component also is the arrear debt. This is where a big focal point of this particular application in terms of the municipalities and the other customers that are not paying Eskom for the electricity that is billed. If you look at the components that make up the electricity period on a movement basis, you can see you've got coal, you've got OCGTs, you've got the employee benefits, you've got maintenance, but you've also then got depreciation, which is the capital expenditure, the amortization of your capex requirement, and then you've got the return that's required to the return or the profitability element that in terms of the NERSA methodology that comes in, which is phased at a much lower rate to try and reduce the impact on your tariffs. So this particular sort of trend you see in the 26 year, you can see in the 27 year the application's got a 5% return on assets, and then on in the 28 year you've got a 6% on the tariffs. When you look at the contribution of Eskom's tariffs to its total tariffs, you can see these are the big components that make up your tariff. So your primary energy costs make up 29%, your OPEX is 21%. You can even see your IPPs now coming in terms of the quantums making up your total average tariff and the cost of your tariff. But I think it's important that when you look at these, you ask yourself, what are those costs that are actually influenceable or controllable or manageable? And you'd see that of these total costs, about approximately only 50% is controllable. The others relate to things that are depreciations or capex related, or taxes or levies, or those kind of components that make up the overall tariff component. So a thing that we had to look at is what are the factors and considerations Eskom is putting in place to look at affordability. There is a government electrification program to provide 20 amp low consumption electricity supply. There's the free basic electricity, and that's basically 50 kilowatt hours per household per month. We also look at a subsidized Eskom tariff for your home like 20 amp customers. And important to note there is that tariff is only increasing at 10% year on year. And also the inclining block tariff, there are some concerns with it, and that is being re-looked at. So when you look at and what we've noticed is that when you look at the FBE customers, what is being provided and paid to the municipalities is, you can see that in the blue shaded line in terms of what should be provided to electricity consumers. But what we're actually seeing is that the orange bar is who's actually receiving the FBE grant or tariff, and that is a significant concern. We need to close this gap in terms of getting the households receiving FBE to increase considerably compared to what is actually being provided to the municipalities from in terms of a funding perspective. So in conclusion, Eskom's application is in accordance with the Electricity Regulation Act, the MYPD methodology. Eskom's generators have been called upon to close the gap when IPPs have been unavailable. The IPP program in it has been significantly delayed compared to the plans compared to the original plans that were meant to have been put in place. I think from an efficient cost perspective, important is that roughly when we look at it, about 50% of your costs are controllable and manageable and influenceable, and the other 50% are levies, tariffs, those kind of cost
Good morning, Chair, and good morning, colleagues. I think it's important that we also highlight some of the issues experienced in terms of generation. So what I'll just focus is on the performance and some of the impacts on the application. I think it's important to note that as I stand here today, we sit at 243 days without load shedding, and I think this is actually bodes well for the country. And in that, we've saved year on year 16 billion rand. So you can imagine last year this time we were experiencing various stages of load shedding. And what has this meant? From the time we started off the actual recovery program, we've clawed back close to 6 gigawatts of megawatts, which is about 6 stages of load shedding. Of importance is the energy availability factor, and I think this is an important KPI that's measured when one looks at the medium-term system adequacy output. It's also an important indicator as the Department of Energy starts to actually finalize the IRP 2024. So we're sitting at 63%. Over the last 2 years, there's been a lot of focus on skills growth. And I think over the years we've seen loss of staff, but when one looks at the staff turnover in the last year, it's at 1.5, way below the actual average. More importantly, in terms of measuring the staff morale, there's a general tone of improved morale from 3.6 to 3.9. The focus clearly is looking at the future, so there's over 2,000 learners that's in the pipeline across the Eskom group, and the focus 80% is on artisans, engineers, operators and technicians. One of the commitments we've made, and that's in the application, is planned maintenance. We know for a fact that we didn't do quality maintenance, there was substandard maintenance, so planned maintenance actually is sitting at 11.9%, and as we now move into the summer period and as we've communicated in our summer outlook, between now and the middle of January we'll really be stepping up on planned maintenance, and in that we obviously eat away from energy availability, but we ensure that the system's adequate. I think when you really go back in terms of the recovery plan, which was approved in March last year, the new board met after being appointed in October 2022. There was a series of interventions with the management of Eskom, and most specifically the generation management, and out of that was born the actual recovery plan. So the initial focus of the strategy was on improving performance, technical performance, and embedded in that there were some key issues. We had identified 6 stations that contributed close on to 70% of breakdowns, and we further dissected that and we got to the root causes, and what we're seeing today is the culmination of that focus on those priority 6 stations. In fact, we've now moved it to priority 8 stations, and I'll show you some sort of performance stats on that. What was important was that with the load shedding, there were specific stations that still continued to perform, and so we actually zoomed into those stations, tried to find out and surface what were the key areas, and it actually came down to people and came down to culture. So the stations at Medupi, Letabo, Matimba and Peking, we took the learnings and sort of embedded that in the priority 6 stations. And when you really look at the priority 6 stations, stations that contributed to the poor performance of breakdowns, they were highlighted as Tutuka, Duva, Majuba, Matla, Kendall, and we then further added Hanot and Kriel. Kusile is performing remarkably well after the reintegration of the temporary stacks, and now the plans are underway by March to reintegrate the permanent stacks. But in terms of performance, once again, Medupi and Kusile, where we had initial problems in the new build, and there was a high dependence from the country in terms of those stations performing, sadly it was embedded with design flaws which we worked to short term, we had to source some specialized skills, once again, to help the team, but also mentor and coach. Moving on to the middle column, we had to continue with the execution of Coburg. I think you're aware and you've seen in the media, Coburg now has been granted Coburg 1 for a further 20 years. I think that will help in terms of contributing to its base load. We are seeing excellent performance at Medupi, and once again, when one looks at the skills, we are trying to embed operational excellence. Kusile 1, 2 and 3 have been returned and performing well. We've also then synchronized Kusile 5, which once again helps towards the base load. And I think what's important is that based on the previous strategy, with us experiencing load shedding, it did not make sense to continue with the shutdown of the old stations. So a lot of what you see in the application from the generation side is on the shutdown of the older stations. So when one looks at Hendrina, Grootvlei, Camden, Arnott and Creel, we revisited those stations, we did technical assessments, and in terms of environmental, so those stations actually are technically compliant, they are environmentally compliant, they are safe, and there was a conscious decision made by the board to actually continue running these stations until 2030. Now what's important is those stations contribute towards the capacity, but they've also been contributing to the energy availability factor. You know, there was this previous statements made in terms of old stations don't perform well, but what, you know, the good story on these stations when you look at Hendrina, Grootvlei and Camden is you put the right people, you do the right maintenance, and you actually see the improved performance. Lastly, as we now aspire towards the 70%, we will ensure the return of about 2,500 megawatts. Where does it come from? Medupi 5 contributes to that. The commercial operation of Kusile 6. We will then also later in the year synchronize Kusile 5 was gone into commercial operation, and we will then synchronize Kusile 6. So that gives you 2,500. And important for us is that we need to then complete Coburg 2. Once Coburg 2 is completed, we will go through that process of also getting the license extension, and then we would have both Coburg units, you know, helping us with base load for a further 20 years. This is just to give you sort of an indication when one looks at breakdowns. Sort of in May last year, we had a total of 18,000 megawatts that was in breakdowns, and that directly contributed to the poor performance through the actual activation of the NECOM under the presidency, the new board, the new EXCO, and the placement of the generation group executive. There were quite a few changes on the people side. We ensured that some of the more experienced power station managers were actually dispatched and moved into the more complicated power stations, and the resultant is that we've seen close to that 4.5, measuring it in October, and you can see that this has made a big difference in terms of the adequacy of the system, but more importantly, it now gives us the opportunity to do more maintenance. This, once again, these are stats, and stats don't lie to you. If one looks at those priority 6 stations, you can see that what I'm trying to highlight in this slide, there is a direct improvement of these stations contributing to the positive performance of the fleet and the positive performance of the Eskom group. I think the direct correlation to this has been a reduction in spend in OCGTs, and that means we could use some of these resources to further and do maintenance. This is just a different view to show you that in terms of the energy availability factor, and I think this is what I want to highlight when we put in the application. When one looks at the application, there were various scenarios that we had to decide on. We had come from a low base of 54%. So when one looks at today, you're looking at an improvement of approximately between 9 and 10% in energy availability factor. And this this has had a direct impact on the lesser usage of the OCGTs. Once again, I think in terms of the application, you'll see the low base that we started, and we had to do a lot of modeling around this. I think what's important, it's based on realistic performance. I think in our previous applications, we actually overpromised and underdelivered on energy availability factor. So when we put in this submission, we had to ensure that it's very realistic. But once again, as much as the application has this, the board has set stretched internal targets for the EXCO, and hence you will see this aspiration to 70%. I think beyond 70%, more work will be done, and you know, in terms of going beyond 70, that will be communicated once the studies are done. But I think important is we sit with an EAF of 63%. The other important factor that I want to highlight is that maintenance in the generation fleet is seasonal. And what that means is that we start to ramp up maintenance from our summer months, and we've communicated the summer plan. We've actually also reduced the factor, the breakdown factor. So what actually happens is, as long as we are below 13,000 megawatts in terms of breakdowns, it actually is good for the system, and we will try to manage the planned maintenance. But what normally happens in the summer months, as we move towards January, you know, we actually peak at close to 80% in some weeks. Once the school holidays start in December and the major industry shutdown, we sit with this extra capacity, so we can afford to do a bit more planned maintenance. So it's against this backdrop that we were a bit, I think, realistic in terms of the EAF performance, and what you will see is a 1% increase in the application. This once again is an independent study done by the CSA, and once again they look at different scenarios. They look at the high road, they look at the low road, and once again they look at what is the realistic road. So in terms of the adequacy for the next 5 years, that report is published on the 31st of October. It's on the web. It's seen that if we perform at the current trend, which is the blue line, we are actually safe, the system's adequate, and it's actually, I think the country is good. What I need to highlight is that with the present EAF aspirations, we've done some calculations. There's also been some external calculations. Eskom can support anything between 2.5 and 3.5% in terms of growth. And I think that is the goal, that's the aspiration. The importance is to stimulate the economy. I think it's in line with the presidency, in line with the goals of government to actually, you know, get this economy going, and Eskom will play its role. What I want to highlight in this slide is that when one looks at from the 26th of March this year, moving on the right hand side, you'll see that there was no load shedding. And if you just compare that very same picture to last year, you know, it varies between stages 2 to stages 6. So I think when one looks at November last year, it was an absolute drama and a disaster. You know, you can see we had many days of stage 6. So I think this, I think as an Eskom guardian, is a proud moment, I think, for us, and I thought it's important that we share this. This is once again just highlighting the impact on the diesel usage, and I think this trend will continue as we start to get to a higher EAF. I think what's important, as we start to see the penetration of the IPPs coming in, the utilization of the coal fleet also drops, having a positive impact on climate. But I think it does also mean we could push the machines a bit harder, which means further growth improvements. This is just once again then to highlight the 2,500 megawatts that's planned to come through in the next financial year. It would be Kuberg, Kusile 6 and Medupi 4. This 2,500 will make a big difference, I think, in terms of our base load at the moment. When one looks at the present base load in the summer months is averaging around 30,000 megawatts. This adds another 2,000. We then sit with a different problem. You know, the problem is, how do we now manage this excess capacity in the evenings, because the consumption isn't that high in the evening. So I think we're going to have to focus on technologies that actually help in terms of managing the flexibility. What I want to also then highlight is the issues around fuel. I think in the application, you'll see that between what was in the application and the forecast, there's a 64% in terms of cost. But as we move in from the FY 2025 to 2026, it's a 9%. And important for that is that to ensure system security, I've just highlighted the need to run those 3 older stations for longer, and that's 17 more units. 17 more units, close to 3 gigawatts. That's helping the system, and then we can also do more maintenance. The impact on that on volume, same in terms of correlation between the application and the forecast. You'll see there's pretty much a 72% increase, but as we move in from 25 to 26, it's a 5%. So I think, Chair, what's important is in terms of the forecast, the OCGTs, what it actually relates to is a 6% in the application, and I think we sit with a lot of, unfortunately, with wind resources and with PV resources, when there's no when there's no wind and there's no sunshine, we have to call upon the coal fleet. So this is planned for, and it's a plan for morning peaks and evening peaks, and it sort of amounts to about 1.5 hours per day. But on most days, we don't use it because we've got the resources. And this would just mean that we'll improve EAF from a base of 63 going on to 65 in terms of the application. And then this also sees a significant projection of the IPPs coming through in the coming years. And this has a direct impact in how we manage the coal fleet. With regards to the MYPD6, and I think it's important, our coal fleet has been running at extremely high utilization factors, and these are moving parts. So over the coming years, we'll ensure that the fleet is not running as high. But what's important is when one looks at where the utilization factor is in the coming years, there is opportunity for us to increase the utilization factor, which means further support to the system, but also further support to growth. I just thought it was important that I highlight this slide. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Shrimangan and Mr. Naga. As you know the drill, if you could take your pen and paper, note the questions, and you will either be required to respond at the end of the presentation, at the end of the hearing when you come back, or if these are questions that we are going to submit in writing, you would indicate so. Okay. So let's start with the main application. The main application, in your return and the depreciation, you move from 110 billion rand in first year, and you go to 150 billion rand. What Mr. Naga you haven't showed is that in your debt, 250 billion rand of that debt has been taken away by National Treasury, and therefore your return and your depreciation should kind of reflect that. You don't have to be covering that interest, you don't have to be paying that interest during construction. If you could find a way of bringing us into your confidence when it comes to that. The second one, you have on slide 10 all of the things that you can control as ESCOM. But what you are not showing in what you can control there is the arrear debt of municipalities. I mean, that's well within your control. So it cannot be that you are expecting the public to assist you in that when they have no control. And further to that, in the slide where you showed the formula, you don't have the part that caters for arrear debt. So I'm unsure how you would want the regulator then to apply the formula of the MYPD and include things that are not in there. And on the generation, I think on page 33 of your generation application, and I think it's slide 16 and 20 of your presentation, you already indicate that your EAF has moved to 65. In fact, by 2025 you'd be at 70, and your usage, OCGCT usage, has reduced. It's sitting at around 3.63%. So considering that you did the application when you didn't have this, are you able to show in the current performance what are those improvements and what are those reductions in that, which would also then mean that the price would be reduced? So and I think that when you look at the financial year we're going to, you are saying that I mean, this year we're already sitting at 65% EAF, and your UCLF has also been reduced. So can we talk about targeting the 70% EAF by 2025, and how does it project? I mean, an efficient licensee, as we are required by the Act to ensure that we only allow an efficient licensee to recover the full costs. An efficient licensee would operate at around 75%. So what are those numbers looking like? Thank you. Those are the only questions for now. Thank you. If you're required to take additional time to decide, please indicate.
Chair, thank you. With regards to, we've noted both your the questions on both sort of aspects of the application. With regards to the return, the depreciation, the set-off, with regards to even your return on assets, we'll come back to you with that in writing. Even with regards to the arrear debt and the claim in terms of the application, we will also come back to you in writing on that specifically. With regards to the targeting the 70% EAF and the related, call it the question around it, the OCGT usage, we'll also put that in writing for you, Chair. So both these sections we'll come back to you in writing, if that's acceptable.
That's acceptable, but I think when after all of the presenters, if you can touch on those issues, I think the right use a language of their choice or a language that they are comfortable with. Those who have not collected headphones, I think they are available at the back. We are now going to move, colleagues, to our next presenter on our program. And I have Mr. Hannes de Wet from Agri Northern Cape. Meneer de Wet. Mr. de Wet, before you start your presentation, please raise your right hand and affirm. Do you solemnly declare that the evidence you are going to give is the truth and the whole truth?
I do.
Thank you. For the record, please state your name and your designation at Agri Northern Cape, and you may start with the presentation thereafter. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Hannes de Wet. I'm part of the Executive Committee of Agri Northern Cape, and ESCOM is one of my portfolios. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity. Only the content of my presentation will a bit of a background about Agri Northern Cape, and although my slides are in English, I'm Afrikaans speaking. I'm coming from the Northern Cape. There we only speak English in self-defense. And please, no photos. My wife doesn't know I'm here. So, thank you. We'll talk about the importance of electricity to the agricultural sector. There's arrear municipal debt, the negotiated price agreements, some commentaries and practical matters that we experience on the farm, and then the strategic priorities. Right, Agri Northern Cape represents the farmers of the Northern Cape. We're quite a big province with a small population. We have mega farmers and subsistence farmers. There are livestock farmers as well as irrigation farmers. And agriculture are price takers. We cannot ask anyone for a 36% increase in our prices. We farm with commodities, cash crops such as corn, wheat, lucerne, soybeans, and high-value crops like pecan nuts, grapes, raisins, dates, and even citrus. Agri Northern Cape are part of the Federal Agri South Africa, and you will see our colleagues from Vrystaat Landbou are here as well. We're all part of the same family. Right, the importance of electricity, the agri sector annual expenditure on electricity amounted to 10.4 billion in the 23-24 financial year. 90% of our agricultural producers are dependent on Eskom as the primary or sometimes the only source of electricity. Irrigation, cold storage, sorting, packing houses, watering of animals and households in rural areas are all part of this electricity reliance. But this reliance goes on through the produce, throughout the food chain. We've got an extremely low price electricity, indicating that we are captured in the market in the short term. The electricity, we have talked about the debt of the municipalities, but if we can receive the outstanding debt of plus minus 80 billion, we would need only a relative small tariff increase for 2026. The Free State and Gauteng provinces combined are responsible for 50% of the debt owed to Eskom. There are no magic wand or soft option to deal with this anymore. And that's the strange thing. We're sitting with this lot of debt, but we still want to rise the price. So if it's not affordable, the debt will only rise. And then there are the negotiated price agreements. For 2026, another 10 negotiated price agreements were included. That results in about 6% of the requested tariff increase of 36.15. And that's the contradiction in this thing. The previous speaker just now said Eskom prices are lower than in most of the countries. So why is it necessary for negotiated price agreements if we are lower than the most of the other countries? Given the backlog in tariff adjustments for 2025, 10 percentage points are for NPAs. The data released by the International Energy Agency indicate that Eskom's prices for industrial and domestic customers are amongst the lowest in the sample. If Eskom's tariffs are competitive, why are there NPAs? This NPA seems to us as an unreasonable burden on the electricity prices and the other uses of electricity. Some commentary on the Eskom's application. When you take the 3 years that they want and the percentage they do, that 3.48 was die gemiddeld van wat my kragrekening sal wees. En as jy dit met 36% per jaar of vir die eerste jaar, dan gaan dit R4.74 wees volgende jaar. En die toenemende koste gaan maak dat ons na 3 jaar met 'n 66% styging sit. Alhoewel die tweede jare sin 11 en 9% is. Die toename in hierdie ding raak net eenvoudig te groot. Die grootste gedeeltes van Eskom se vraag vir die hoër prys is die return on assets, primary energy and the operating costs, plus the new environmental levy and the carbon tax. We know the primary energy costs are the larger contributor to the requested revenue increase. Coal remains the dominant primary energy cost. The coal prices and availability are key in determining the cost of generation, and therefore I think NERSA have to have a detailed audit of the coal supply chain and the contracts, because there's only 64% of the coal market is dominated by 5 players. So there is necessary for contract oversight. The coal procurement challenges includes Eskom supplier base is limited. The mines are targeting export markets. There's no new greenfield investments in mining. And the middling coal that Eskom uses are exported to China and India. The operating costs, the workforce, a specific benchmarking is required to determine if the workforce is cost efficient. In 2005, Eskom generates 7.4 gigawatt hours per employee. In 2021, it was only 4.5 gigawatt per employee. Eskom indicates in there that the salaries at the lower level of business are above market median, managerial level are aligned, and the workforce of Eskom has increased through the past years. And I think the workforce cost per employment level should be scrutinized by NERSA. The maintenance cost, we just heard that the plants don't have to run so hard, so that would give us that the maintenance cost would come down. So why is this big rise necessary? Reductions on the major cost drivers are necessary to reduce requested income to more moderate levels. Other aspects like municipal debt, NPAs and corruption should be addressed. We acknowledge that the tariff increases should at least be sufficient to transition Eskom towards a more cost-reflective electricity tariff. But then it must be prudent and efficient. Unfortunately, currently there are some skepticism to whether it's prudent or efficient. The depreciated replacement cost assets constitute the bulk of the return and will decrease substantially over the particular period. The value of the assets was determined in March 2020. In 2024, there are more than 500 billion added to the opening balance as a valuation adjustment, that doubling the value of the assets. We would ask NERSA to probably revisit these figures with respect to seriously inflated new generating facilities. At least some of the existing infrastructure is unlikely to be replaced, implying that the historical cost might be a better basis for evaluation. To go back to the imprudence and the inefficiency of Eskom, all of us are aware of the Zondo Commission findings about Eskom. So the review of contracts, better oversight, and the eradication of fraud and corruption's recovery are necessary. These remediative actions are the responsibility of NERSA and the line departments within the government. In terms of the Electricity Regulation Act, the regulator must enforce performance and compliance and take appropriate steps in the case of non-performance. Just some reality in the Northern Cape. They do a lot of onderhoud in die generation sector, maar die transmission sector word agtergelaat. Dit help nie, hulle wek meer krag op, maar op die plaasvlak sit die mense sonder krag nie. Daar's 'n transformer afgewees 30 Desember 2023. Hy het geval op die grond nadat hy rapporteer is. Daai fout is eers op 28 Februarie reggemaak. Beteken 315 hektaar het vir 2 maande sonder krag gestaan. Gelukkig is daar 'n ding soos diesel generators, maar dit kos R280,000 'n week. There's a lot of this similar faults. Another customer, 14 days without power. Although Eskom recruits more staff, service delivery in the rural areas are poor. And then we've got, omdat dit 'n groot uitgebreide gebied is, het Eskom baie punte in die rural areas. En die kleiner transformers het geen nut daarin om krag te spaar nie, want as jy die vaste koste van hierdie punte vat, daai een is myne, meneer die voorsitter, ek kan vir jou die rekening wys, dit werk uit op R52,78 per kilowattuur op daai spesifieke punt, omdat die verbruik laag is en die vaste koste bly daar. Werk nou daarop 'n 35% verhoging uit. Eskom asks consumers to use less electricity, but you won't save when you use less electricity. We take note of the MYPD6, but are calling for consideration of the best interests of Eskom, South African economy and the public. The requested increase will not serve the interest of the South African economy or the public. And given the current use of electricity in the agri-sector, many of our producers will be in a worse situation, threatening their existence. With a view to reduce the drastic tariff increase proposed by Eskom, I want to recommend the following. And NERSA to revisit and consider recommendations of the VGBE report commissioned by National Treasury that was released on 1 March 2024. More stringent measures to collect outstanding debt from municipalities, reducing the requested level for return on assets to more manageable levels, temporary forfeiture of the environmental levy and carbon tax by the fiscus, because this is a contradiction as well. On the one hand, the fiscus give to Eskom some money, and on the other hand, they want the environmental levy. Greater involvement of NERSA with the oversight of Eskom contracts, speeding up the process to deal with fraud and corruption, disclosing more information on the disconnect between NERSA and Eskom, especially with respect to the operating costs, possibility of export duties on coal exports, and the consideration of the economic impact of an increase of 36.15% in electricity tariffs on the economy. It will rise inflation as well as interest rates. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. De Wet. You defended yourself very well. With your English, of course. May you just note a few questions. That there are a number of things you've mentioned that I just want to clarify. In I think it's your second slide where you say that the 80 billion rand debt will make the price increase to be 5%. I mean, can you just maybe help with the unit economics? Are you taking the 80 billion rand in 1 year and just putting it in the Eskom pricing? Okay, if you could explain that. Then the second one is around the NPAs. You are saying that your view is that NPAs should not exist, or I couldn't understand. I think you are saying that the prices, Eskom says that the electricity prices across the world are higher than their ones. So are you saying that based on that, then we shouldn't have NPAs because we have the lowest price? Where would these NPAs go to anyway? Okay, and then I think it was also because you mixed with Afrikaans whilst I was still listening in English. How did you get to the 66.15% in 3 years of the increases? And
Can I?
if you could note these
Okay.
questions, you can go back to that when you're explaining. And I think the last one is you have a recommendation that the valuation of the assets should be on a historic basis. And I'm just trying to check if you are saying that Eskom must go against the electricity pricing policy. I think Mr. Naga, when he presented his first statement, was that this application is based on the electricity pricing policy and a lot of other things. But those are the questions I just want clarity on. Thank you, Mr. Tebet.
Do you want me to?
If you can respond.
Sorry.
But I didn't see you noting, but I assume
No.
you've got all of the questions.
No, I was concentrating on this defensive language. About the 80 billion, yes, that was when you brought that in 1 year. I know it's academic calculation, but that's just to show the big importance of getting the outstanding debt back. And our regulars paying for municipalities not paying. The other one on the NPA, no, it's just if with all these agreements in the NPAs, the cost is shifting. Someone has to pay for the power, and if I get less price to pay, then the other guy has to pay more. So that's the only thing I wanted to highlight, is that this contracts could make a difference on this high price hike. And then the 66%, I will take you there. If you take I have on the side there, I don't know if you can see, it's 3 rand and 48 now, and with the 36% increase, it would become 4 rand 74. Put on the 27, 11.81% increase.
Apologies, Mr. DeVet. I don't think it has anything to do with your economics. Colleagues, can we switch off the phones? You colleagues who are helping us, those who have phones that are making noise, please remove them from the proceedings. You can see them. Thank you. Mr. DeVet, please continue.
Okay, if you take the 11.81% for 2027 and you apply it to the 474, you get to 5 rand 50, 5 rand 30, and the next year if you take the 9.1% on the 5 rand 30, you go to 5 rand 78. Now 5 rand 78 minus the 3 rand 48 would give you 2 rand 30, and if you divide that 2 rand 50 by the 3 rand 48 that it's now, you get a 66% difference. That's the accumulative, to show the accumulative rise of the price. Sorry, would you
It's the historic cost. You're saying that if they use the historic costs, then the return and the value would be lower. And I'm saying that when Eskom started, they indicated that the reason they are using the depreciated replacement cost is because the electricity pricing policy says they must use the depreciated replacement cost.
Okay, but you see, it's easy, not easy. I don't know what the reasons was for the 50 billion rand coming into this year's asset evaluation. Is it because of new power stations, or why is there 50 million in that slide? If you,
I'm sure you mean 500 billion rand that came in that year. And in the application, I will request Mr. Naga to direct you to that part of the application. I think it's page, just after page 70. He will be able to show you how they add the 500 billion rand.
yeah, because that double the assets now, and then the return on asset must be higher, and that's part of this big rise in the electricity price.
Okay. Mr. De Wet, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for your presentation. Colleagues and members of the public, we are going to now move to the next presentation. The next presentation we have is from a member of the public. I have the name Marcel. I am not going to try and pronounce the surname. He will assist me by pronouncing it. I am told Mr. Marcel is not here. We will reserve his time only for today, so I'm hoping that he will arrive soon. Then we are going to go to our next presentation. Our next presentation is from the Free State Agriculture, and I've got the name of Jack Armour. Mr. Armour? Mr. Armour, please, in the meantime, raise your right hand and affirm. Do you solemnly declare that the evidence you are going to give to this is the truth and the whole truth?
I do.
Thank you. For the record, please state your name and your designation at the Free State Agriculture, and start with your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Jack Armour from Free State Agri. I'm operations manager there, but I'm also joined in the audience by some farmers. Gani Botha's our CEO, but he also farms. Francois Wilken, our president, unfortunately couldn't make it this morning at the last minute. Ben Domini, who's sitting here, he's a farmer from Rates. He had a successful rose greenhouse operation going, and because of labor costs and energy costs, he had to shut down his rose farm over there. Christo Doorman is a farmer just outside Bloemfontein over here. He also is dependent on household use energy, and it's just unaffordable for him. And then we've got Anton Kutsia also sits on our committee, and he's a consultant in energy, used to work for Eskom, so he advises us and helps us as well as a committee. So the outline of my presentation is just to address some general comments on the Eskom presentation, the questions asked by NERSA, look at some of the costs and utilizations and some of the inefficiencies, and then some cross-cutting questions. So in general, number one, to start out, the farmers of the Free State say no to Eskom increases. This is the message from our 2,500 commercial farming entities who affiliate to Free State Agriculture and whom we represent. They are organized into 144 local farmers associations. In the current economic climate, Free State farmers can't even afford Eskom at its current current rates. That's the fact. So we thus object to any Eskom price increases. Any increases get passed down to the farmer, as Mr. De Wet said earlier on. Farmers are price takers. So in other words, all the middlemen just push those costs down to the farmer through increased input cost prices or lower prices received by the farmer in the end. Just to, I think, highlight again Eskom's regulatory framework and regulations, and what the role of Eskom, of what NERSA is number one is to safeguard the customer's needs. So what do we as farming customers need? Number one, we need affordable, reliable and safe energy. Those are our needs. Number two, to achieve the efficient and sustainable development of the electricity infrastructure. And Mr. De Wet spoke about rural service delivery, which sometimes we as rural customers feel we don't get the same level of services as commercial, as the commercial, industrial, urban users. But I know Eskom is sitting over here, and I would like to say on Friday we had a report, 5:30, of powers that we've been out since Wednesday, and just before a weekend by 6:30 we received a a message saying that Eskom power had been restored. So yes, we do get some rural service delivery, but in the rural areas, I think the challenge is so much greater because of the distances between farms, and we understand that, but we also don't always feel we get the service. Our members don't feel they get the service that they need. Further on, NERSA's role is to facilitate investment, but I know NERSA also serves with other applicants, not just Eskom, but who are Eskom's investors? And as far as we understand, the state is the only investor in Eskom. So just a question to keep in mind. Furthermore, promote universal access. Yes, we've got universal access to, but local municipalities aren't paying for this access, and that's what's causing part of the problem. And then also the expensive line fees and the immediate cut-off for rural users. A lot of our farmers that are buying power directly from Eskom, if they don't pay it a month or two, they cut off. But municipalities can keep rolling over debt over and over and over. They don't get cut off. So it's unfair treatment between different users of the same supplier. Furthermore, NERSA's role is to enhance competitiveness and customer choice. How much choice do we really have? And we all still remember in the media the case of Mafube Power, rural industries that was trying to supply power during load shedding, that was taken to court because they were trying to supply power. That's against competitiveness and choice. And finally, to balance the interest of customer, end user, licensee, or the investor, whoever that is, and the public. So just an outline of NERSA's role and what NERSA is supposed to be achieving, and we urge NERSA, please, to look at these. Furthermore, Eskom blames NERSA for not allowing Eskom to recover the actual efficient cost of producing electricity for many years. Now, to use the words efficient, I don't know if the Zondo Commission was referred to, and we hear in the media of inefficient pricing and costing and everything. I don't think it's NERSA's fault. How can Eskom blame NERSA for not allowing this efficient cost of producing energy? We've read about the 10 times cost overruns at Medupi and Kusile. That's not efficient. And then whatever Eskom can't claim back in the pricing mechanism, they claw back through the clawback mechanism. So that just seems to build up and build up. So we call for an urgent review of electricity pricing and preferably full market pricing. That is our opinion. Furthermore, on the cost of electricity, the affordability issues, Eskom increases have been way above inflation since 2008, and there's a graph that shows the increases in electricity way above inflation related. So for farmers, it's not just electricity that we've had to cope with that are way above inflation prices. Labor costs have increased above inflation every single year, minimum wages, and they've substantially increased in the last 10 years, also above inflation. The rand-dollar linked input costs, because of our economy doing badly, one of the big factors being Eskom, is that all these rand-dollar linked input costs, which agriculture is reliant on, have also increased way above inflation. Furthermore, we've got infrastructure costs. Farmers are paying for fixing the roads themselves, just to get their crop to market, just to get inputs to the farm, because government is not supplying those infrastructure costs. So it's another cost on farmers. There's disaster losses with increased weather, climate change, that the government is not supporting the farmers with these disaster losses. So there's no state help. And all these costs are being absorbed by farmers. So the pressure as farmers, as the price taker, is just increasing exponentially. And Eskom is really just a final straw. So if we look at the allowable revenue increases granted and proposed going forwards, if we just add up the percentages, I know Mr. De Wet used the cumulative cost, but if we just add up the percentages for the next 5 years that are proposed from 2026, that's an 80% cumulative, all the percentages added up. So that's just my rough calculation, but those are the percentages that are proposed in Eskom's applications for the next 5 years. But look what we've already had. Last year, 9.6%. This year, an 18.65%. And next year, there's already approved at 12.74%. So, I mean, that is massive increases in Eskom. It continues to be way above inflation, and for the fixed cost component as well. So not just the energy generation cost, the electricity cost, but the fixed cost component that Mr. De Wet pointed out is such a large percentage of a bill that's using very little energy, of a point that's using very little energy, but the fixed cost component is already high. And then the other issue is reduced energy demand. Eskom is showing that its demand for its energy is reducing. Yes, they say they can supply enough for 3 to 5% growth in the economy, but generally the demand for energy has been dropping with all the alternative energy sources coming in. And if there was capacity, transmission capacity, a lot more alternative energy could be wheeled across, and from the areas of our country that have the 3 capes that have got a lot of solar and wind potential, but just hasn't got the transmission capacity to get all that alternative energy into the grid. And then, as I think Mr. De Wet also said, no one's been brought to book for the gross overspending in Kusile Mudupe, inflated procurement costs, inflated coal prices, and the transport mafia, and all those impacts on Eskom. Eskom load shedding has destroyed the economy, and that contributes to the affordability issues, why we just can't afford any increases. And then also, we don't applaud Eskom for doing their job to just keep the lights on. Yes, we're very grateful that we don't have load shedding anymore, but we're glad that Eskom is now doing their job to provide energy. That's what they're supposed to do. As a monopoly state provider backed by the state, there shouldn't have been all that load shedding in the past. That should have been accounted for. Just a general issue, a cross-cutting issue on the issue of gas as a transition fuel. If we look at the importance of viable agricultural sector in the Free State, and there's a bit of Northern Cape also dark green for maize in the map, but the Free State is the staple and a stable provider of food for the country. So we ensure the food security of the country. We're producing nearly 60% of the sunflower in the country, 43% of the maize and soya, 30% of the potatoes, and 19-20% of beef and sheep in the country. But if we look at maize specifically, look where the maize is produced, there in the northern Free State. Now look at the next slide. That is the bread. So that was the breadbasket of the country. But look at where we've got all this gas exploration, which is another threat to agriculture in the Free State. So when I asked the question about will an increased gas production in South Africa to reduce energy costs, the answer I got was no. So why are we allowing this massive risky gas mining in the Northern Free State, which is the breadbasket of our country, if it's not going to reduce energy costs? I don't understand that. So the question that NASA always asks us is price elasticity and substitution threshold. Mr. De Wet said that Eskom prices is very inelastic for agriculture. But the other day at a Reserve Bank presentation, Dr. Rasid Kasim said Eskom pricing is not elastic at all. So for farmers, it's not elastic. You are either dependent on Eskom, and specifically at certain times, or you're not dependent on it if you can afford, if you've got alternative energy. Regarding threshold pricing, for which it becomes viable for farmers to convert to alternative energy, this threshold has been reached long ago, but it depends on various factors. Number one, being able to sell back into the grid or not. I mean, if you can sell back into the grid, you can pay off your investment much quicker. But there's a lot of what do you call those boulders in the way of being able to sell back into the grid. It's not really possible. Then the cost of battery storage makes it also very expensive not to have Eskom as a backup. But just having Eskom as a backup makes it you've got to pay all these fixed costs. So you've got to weigh up all those issues. And then also the uncertainty not warranting conversion. So the mining, for example, with these gas mining threats over your farm, you think, gee, is it worth spending all this money to put in alternative energy if my farm's going to be expropriated for gas mining or for something else? So furthermore, let us look at some of the efficiencies. If demand is 2% down projected already, and sales forecasts further expected to go down, Eskom is in a downward utility spiral. Eskom needs to accept that and adapt to that. If Eskom were a market player and not a monopoly, they would rationalize their staff and reduce the wage bill. They'd ensure buying viable coal, value for money, efficiency. They'd ensure that outstanding local municipality bills are paid up. Outstanding debt is not the farmer's fault, it's not the consumer's fault. Why must paid up customers suffer because of political decisions and political interference with municipalities not paying their bills? And as previously was said, that is in Eskom's control. And I think the chairman actually said that that's fully within the Eskom's control, is to recoup those unpaid municipal debts. So Eskom needs to accept its role as a baseload or peak power provider. And then focus on increasing grid capacity where excess alternative energy generation capacity can't exist, as I've already said. The proliferation of these BESS power storage systems to also help with the baseload capacity. At Harvard Power Station just outside Bloemfontein over here, I think we've got over 10 applications for solar farms and BESSes into that one power, what do you call it?
Substation.
Substation, that's right. But can that substation handle all 10 applications at once? So there's a lot of money and investment going into environmental impact studies and everything to do these new solar farms and BESS stations and stuff. But if only a few are going to be allowed, are we not wasting money by not maybe regulating that process a bit better? And then also the farmers themselves, often these investors come and they sign a lease agreement on the whole farm for 5 or 10 years. So the farmer is constrained of expanding or doing anything on his farm because he's got this contract on his farm which is very lucrative, so he signs it. But then once he signed it, he realizes, oh dear, now I'm stuck, now I can't really do anything on my farm. So you sort of, so agricultural productivity is also sometimes hampered, but the cash injection is welcome sometimes as well. Then another very worrying factor of us is how can, and also looking at NASA's role in ensuring sustainability, is how can Eskom be asking for exemptions from their air quality greenhouse gas polluting limits on 8 Eskom power substations? Yes, we know it's very expensive to sieve out this pollution that's going into the atmosphere, and it costs a lot of money. But how long have we known about the carbon taxes and the pollution and stuff? 39% of South Africa's pollution is coming from Eskom, the biggest polluter. Yes, it's got a cost implication. It means money that's got to be saved, found somewhere else. But we can't keep polluting from Eskom. So Eskom needs to reduce their contribution to carbon tax. Yet farmers are criticized for cows putting methane into the atmosphere. That's not when the key culprit in the room is actually Eskom. If we look at the calculation of the allowable returns, I think Mr. De Wet touched on that as well. The first two aspects there is the investor returns. Now, who's the investor? The state. But the state has bailed out Eskom. It's not that they're expecting a return, but the South Africa Pty Limited needs a return on Eskom. That money that they've bailed Eskom out with, they need that Eskom can supply the secure energy so that we can have that economic growth that was alluded to earlier. Efficiency measures are very important. Why is Eskom still paying so much for independent power producers, the energy that they're procuring from independent power producers? Surely some of those contracts can be reviewed, because some of those prices, with the drastic reduction in alternative energy production having come down, why are some of these costs still so high? Maybe some of those contracts need to be urgently reviewed. They cannot still be binding when it's unrealistic profits that some of those companies are getting. So once again, I ask, who are the real investors? Who's profiting out of Eskom? The smelters that are being subsidized, what NRPs that Mr. De Wet spoke about. So what's the abbreviation? The
Negotiated pricing agreements, NPAs.
That's NPAs, negotiated price agreements. Those are the smelters. Yes, we need our smelters to do beneficiation in South Africa, and we need the job creation. But to be giving them energy for dirt cheap, and it's companies that are making massive profits that aren't even listed in South Africa Stock Exchange, where are those profits going to other countries? So that's not benefiting South Africa. Overseas funders coming in and funding things here, they want a return on capital, on the investment. That return is going back to the other countries. It's not staying in South Africa. The last part of the allowable return calculation, the RCA, is this capped, or is the RCA allowed to increase as much as it wants to, and then it gets clawed back again? So maybe something for NASA to consider is to cap that RCA and not to allow it to increase. Just the last thing on the fixed cost component. Yeah, I've got some real Eskom accounts from a farmer, an irrigation farmer. So if one looks at his use over here, this little graph, you can see that in May and June the farmer uses hardly any energy, but his peak use is in November, and this statement for that 1 point is in November, where your fixed cost component is 36%, and that's in his peak use. And this farmer, I think, peak and off peak, and he's using Ruriflex. And Ruriflex is very important for the farmers because they can irrigate at night, and irrigating at night is very important from an irrigation efficiency perspective, because then you don't have all this evaporation of water into the atmosphere. A lot more water goes into the ground, so your water usage efficiency is improved. But now we're hearing that Eskom wants to increase its cost at night because during the day there's a lot of excess energy. So it would make sense to use the excess energy in the day for irrigation, but actually from a water efficiency. So once again, this food energy water nexus question is we need to conserve energy as well. It doesn't help we're saving on Eskom, but we're actually wasting water again. So those things are very important. But then the graph at the bottom over there, so even in one of the months, I think that's July, when the farmer doesn't use that much energy, his fixed cost component is still very high on his bill. And then I just did a rough calculation here on the 90% in the month when he's using no energy. Obviously, most of his bill is then fixed cost components. The farmers are still referring to line fees, and a lot of farmers actually paid for the lines. They paid off that line over 15, 20 years in the past. So those lines technically belong to the farmers, but Eskom takes them over, and then Eskom, because of the maintenance that Eskom needs to be doing on those lines. But there's a lot of farmers that actually paid for that basic infrastructure on their farms. Yes, it's now got to be maintained and replaced, but is it happening as fast as it should be doing to maintain the safety of those lines? So in summary, farmers can't afford an Eskom price increase. Not small farmers who can't afford the network charges, not your extensive crop or livestock farmers who are basically just using the Eskom for their household use. There, once again, the line fees are already exorbitant. Not your intensive farmers who are reliant on Eskom for your irrigation farmers, your dairy farmers, your piggeries, greenhouse and poultry farmers, who there are alternative energy options available, and a lot of them have converted. But Eskom as a base load is still important for them as a backup. And just that connection to have Eskom as a backup is exorbitant, and we hear that Eskom is wanting to charge even more for having Eskom as a backup if you're not using their power all the time. Consumers also can't afford Eskom, and I'm sure we'll hear about that later. So Eskom needs to restructure, accept that it's in a downward utility spiral, downscale, and stop draining our economy through non-paying local municipalities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Amma. Mr. Amma, I think your presentation for me was very clear. The only thing I just want to find out on the capping of the RCA, can you just explain a bit more what you mean, or what you would expect that clawback to be capped like?
As I understand it, and maybe I'm understanding it wrong, is that the MYPD mechanism is applying for future expected costs and revenues. But whatever is not within that scope is then added to the clawback mechanism and is then just added to the next MYPD later on. So even though Eskom is limited by NAFSA in what they can charge, they just add it through the clawback mechanism to get back later. So if that RCA could be kept somehow, that it's not just building up all the time, and we get these ridiculous 36 price increases in 1 year, which no one can afford. So is the mechanism the problem? And maybe I'm understanding the situation incorrectly, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Amma. I have no further questions. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to move to the next presentation. The next presentation we have is from Mr. Andile Zito from NUMSA. Mr. Zito, in the meantime, whilst the presentation is being loaded, may you please raise your right hand and affirm, do you solemnly declare that the evidence you are going to give is the truth and the whole truth? It needs to be recorded, Mr. Zito. Come closer. You don't want to confirm that you'll tell the truth?
Yes, Chair, I do confirm.
Thank you. Mr. Zito, may you please state your name, your designation at NUMSA, and then you may start with your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Andile Zito. I'm NUMSA Regional Secretary for Free State and Northern Cape.
Please go ahead with your presentation, Mr. Zito.
Thank you, Chair. I think the farmers before us, it looks like we're sharing from the same slide. Chair, we are National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa. But before we are workers, we are members of community. We are the largest trade union in South Africa, recognized at Eskom. We are organized also in most IPP's plants in Northern Cape. We are standing here, Chair. Firstly, we reject Eskom revenue application because it will result in a tariff increase of 36%, 12%, and 9% in the next financial 3 years, as per their application. We reject this application, Chairperson, because we are at a stage now where we don't need Eskom to have an additional mandate of suffocating South Africans. We've got enough suffocation that we are receiving both from the state, and it can't be that Eskom now continues to become an excellent player in making sure that the impact on our communities and the working class at large continues to become unaffordable, especially to the poor working class that pays for electricity. This results in retrenchments and layoffs, short time, worsening unemployment and deindustrialization in most of the companies where we are organized, but also it does have a direct impact into our economy. Speakers before us, Chair, they put it very clear that we cannot be held liable because the municipalities are not paying what they needed to pay. We show you there, Chairperson, in terms of our own calculations on what municipalities are owing to Eskom. And Eskom has enough authority to recoup its monies from those communities. It can't then that they are being owned. That must also form part of their basis. We reject this part also, and we further request that NERSA, you are called upon now once again to exercise your good leadership as we have done before. These proposed electricity tariffs increase are unaffordable, and as a result, employers find painful ways to cut costs, and the most commonly used method is retrenchment, which is an assault on workers' livelihoods. Basically, Chairperson, standing here, all of us, even speakers before us, we are saying to NERSA that the application of ESCOM, it's an application to increase the unemployment in our country. It's an application to make sure that food production is compromised, industrialization is also further compromised, and most workers must continue to be laid off, to be retrenched because of this application. The national crisis of unemployment and deindustrialization, we have already spoken about that. What we show you on this slide, Chair, is that when we speak about the impact on retrenchment, we give you an example that this impact, one amongst the major reasons that led to those companies listed there. The speaker before us spoke about smelters and their profit, which is not finding its way back to the domestic market. We give you a list of companies there that are amongst other challenges that are at the risk, and below there we give you some examples of companies that are found both in Free State and in Northern Cape that have recently either laid off workers or retrenched members. Amongst the major challenges is the high costs of manufacturing, high cost of ESCOM. We continue on the next slide, Chairperson, calling to NERSA to reject also ESCOM, Department of Energy open cycle gas turbines fuel cost application to maintain the efficiency of 6% load factor, which will translate to a cumulative of 21 billion over the 3-year MYPD6 period. From April 2022 to March 2024, ESCOM has spent 27 billion rands on DOE's peakers, exceeding the NERSA allowed cost of 10 billion by an additional 17 billion. Basically, Chair, what we are indicating here is by our own research that, again, sitting on this public hearing, we are sitting with ESCOM that has already exceeded outside what was permitted by NERSA on that financial year that is stipulated there. We call on NERSA to only approve dispatching this peaker station at 1% load factor because of high cost of running these plants from diesel. At 1% load factor, this peaker station should be available for peak periods and during emergencies, providing much more security of supply. If NERSA hits our call of 1% load factor to limit gas IPPs to 88 hours in a year, this will reduce DOE peaker station cost from 21 billion application to 9 billion, including the capacity payment for all in the next 3 years. We provide the Chair the breakdown as per our own understanding as workers and our own calculation and cost with regards to the application and the future impact and what is currently happening. ESCOM claims that it is necessary to operate on OCGTs at 6% load factor to cover REIPP's delay. This is unjustified considering 1% delay in coal plant shutdowns. 2. Additional coal generation capacity. 3. The most recent medium-term system adequately delay in coal plant shutdowns. The RP2009 shutdown of 10,000 megawatts of coal generation capacity by 2013 and replace it with 2,400 megawatts of renewable energies. The cabinet decision of postponing the above coal generation shutdown. Basically, Chair, what our summary understanding on this part is that one, the R6 per unit that IPPs are charging towards the grid forms part of this application at an annual 6% increase over the next 3 years. And if you take that alone out as workers, we don't see anything that makes this application to be 36%. Hence, we continue to say, NIESA, at the time of making a decision, we are of the view that 1% increase to ESCOM application will be the right decision to take. Because the closure of coal generation shutdown has been postponed. And if they are, therefore the recently improved generation plant performance together with the declining electricity demands should see a drop in OCGT utilization. We then, Chair, continue on that slide to give our calculation on what is projected will be additional capacity generation towards the national grid if Kusile as planned, both Unit 5, Unit 6 and Mudupi Unit 4, if they are expected return or for July 2024 and July 2025 and March 2025, if all those planned expectations of bringing additional energy to the national grid, then why this application? Why this application of 36% when currently even government employees across different sectors, there is not a single sector, Chair, that has given increases that are closer to what ESCOM's application is talking about. There's not a single sector in this country, even the 350 that the government is giving to the unemployed, has never reached the 36% application. On what basis? On what basis when we are sitting here, Chair, and there's a public record at a Zondo Commission on how people messed up the same ESCOM that belongs to South Africans? On medium-term system adequacy report of 2025 to 2019 states that the system adequate and will remain adequate if the high EAF above 65% is maintained. 2019 government decision to support ESCOM with equity injection to service their debt required ESCOM agent intervention on 10 areas. One condition of the DOE and the National Treasurer was that we must the ESCOM must renegotiate exorbitant and unaffordable power purchase agreements for bid window 1, bid window 2, which are pushing up the prices. The speaker before us was very eloquent in further explaining that we need to encourage, we need to demand basically that ESCOM must start renegotiating these agreements, with some of them ending in the next 10 years or so. It appears that the outcome of this process didn't yield any positive results, as we are witnessing an extremely high tariffs from bid window 1. And we also, Chairperson gives examples there in terms of our own calculations. Earlier on, Chair, we indicated that we are a registered trade union that is also organized in those farms that this generation of some of the IPPs are being generated. So we are part of this energy generation in a different way. for almost the same energy generated between bid window 1 and bid window 4. The difference in cost of 10 billion for financial year 2025 to 2026. This is a result of an exorbitant tariffs from bid 1, which are sitting at 5 rand per kilowatt an hour, 6 rand per kilowatt hour for solar and concentrated solar power respectively. The current new renewable IPP's procurement strategy pursued by the Department of Energy and ESCOM is out of touch with the current context. We have explained both the capacity and the impact to the consumers. Sorry for that. The system is not in need of any additional capacity apart from that which has already been planned and committed by ESCOM and IPPs that have already signed power purchase agreements. Any additional generation capacity being funded by ESCOM or private sector for renewable energies, IPP's rollout will have negative impact, Chair, on our country. And on ESCOM, both operational and financial, this increase total electricity cost for the country will lead to job losses and slow economic growth. NUMSA calls on NERSA to conduct due diligence on the battery energy storage by independent power producers that have recently reached a commercial close to renewable energies independent power producers bid window 7 that are still waiting for the preferred bidder status. NUMSA submit that not all these projects will be commercial operation connected to the grid in the third year of MYPD6 and therefore calls on NERSA to subtract all these projects from ESCOM application. Last part, Chair, which we really want to emphasize, that this application in its current form is an insult to South Africans. This application on its current form does not encourage any investment to our own country. This application on its current form does not encourage manufacturing. Our economy is bleeding. Our communities are swimming on a sea of poverty. Our local state and ESCOM reluctance to go after the local municipalities is another factor which makes us to be here today. This 36% application on year 1, it's also unimaginable. We cannot, at some point, we thought that ESCOM is application wants to reduce the current cost down by 36%. It took us time to understand that they wanted an increase. That is our last input, Chair, and we want to thank you very much, and we hope that as you continue with these hearings, you will take with you the views and the presentations presented here, both by labor, communities, and the businesses. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Zito. Mr. Zito, I just have 2 questions to clarify with you. Most of the negotiated pricing agreements, and then Glencoe is also one of them in the list that you have. The main driver was that if they don't get a negotiated pricing agreement, they will then close their operation, and therefore there would be retrenchments. And I think those negotiated pricing agreements were also supported by your organization, NUMSA, in written comments and in the presentation. So if you could comment around the NPAs, your support for them, and the fact that they make us avoid retrenchments. Then the second one is in your table that you have of the open cycle gas turbines that are being used. I think the numbers you are showing there are only of the Department of Energy's open cycle gas turbines. are you then saying that those must be reduced by 1%, or are you saying even the ESCOM open cycle gas turbines must be reduced by 1%? Thank you. Those are the two questions for clarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. On the last part of the on the last question, we are saying, Chair, that those must be reduced by 1%.
Including the ESCOM open cycle gas turbines?
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
Thank
Chair.
you.
On the first one about Glencore example you were showing, Chairperson, you are right. The main purpose of a trade union is to defend jobs and create an environment where there is creation of sustainable jobs. Glencore, we were part of the processes and engagements with the municipalities. When we say those contracts must be renegotiated, we don't mean that we do encourage the political threat that Glencore is saying that it's not their way, they will de-invest. We need and we do work with Glencore, and we encourage that the current agreements, renegotiating them doesn't mean that Glencore must close. No, we don't want job losses. People who want job losses is ESCOM. So our answer on that, we don't mean that we support what Glencore says, but we are part of the process that we work jointly with Glencore in making sure that, because some of these concessions, Chair, are properly done at the local state in some instances. That is why in some local government areas, you've got IDZ areas where there are different incentives that have been given. But I think it was Mr. Jack before me. He further explained that whilst we are supporting them, but the profits are not revolving around the domestic market in South Africa. So that is our response, difficult as it is, but we are a trade union. We won't be part of Glencore approach to say if the contract is renegotiated, they will consider disinvesting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Zito.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, we have in our program, and I suspect the programs that you have don't have the item I'm going to call now, because it was not the updated program. We have a presentation from the Democratic Alliance, and I've got three names that was given: Mr. Werner Horn, Mr. David McKay, and Mr. Jafta Mukwena, who each of them have 3 minutes. I am trying to check with the organizers. We have been going for 2 hours, and I suspect that after 2 hours I'm required to ensure that there's a biological break for most of us, but I'm not sure if the tea and the coffee is ready outside. So if you could assist colleagues by making sure that after this presentation we are going to take a tea break for 15 minutes, come back, and we will finish by around lunchtime for today. Thank you. Can I start with you, Mr. Horn? If you could raise your right hand and affirm, do you solemnly declare that the evidence you are going to give is the truth and the whole truth?
So help me God.
Thank you. For the record, please state your name and your position at the Democratic Alliance.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, all present. My name is Werner Horn. I'm the provincial chairperson of the Democratic Alliance in the Free State. So thank you for the opportunity, Chairperson.
First, let me swear your other colleagues, and then they can do that. We can come to Mr. David McKay. Mr. McKay, may you please raise your right hand and affirm? Do you solemnly declare that the evidence you are going to give is the truth and the whole truth?
I do.
Thank you. For the record, please state your name and your position in the DA.
I'm David Mackay, a member of the Free State Legislature and the spokesperson for COGTA and Human Settlements.
Thank you, Mr. Mackay. Mr. Jafta, please raise your right hand and affirm. Do you solemnly declare that the evidence you are going to give is the truth and the whole truth?
I do.
Thank you. For the record, please state your name and your position in the DA.
My name is Muferefere Jafta Mukwena. I'm the Provincial Deputy Chair of the Democratic Alliance of the Free State.
Thank you. Mr. Horn, your 3 minutes starts now.
Thank you, Chair. Our presentation, we firstly believe it's important to say that in dealing with this application, NERSA must of course always consider carefully its self-declared goals in regulating the electricity industry, and that's firstly to ensure sustainability of the industry whilst looking to make electricity more affordable and accessible, and secondly to balance the economic interests of all stakeholders. We secondly, Chairperson, feel strongly that this specific application must be considered in the historical context of previous applications, and the compounded effect of increases approved for Eskom over the last 5 years, in our view, is in excess of 60% in total, whilst average inflation and average increase in income of a typical South African household was around 4%. We also agree with Agriculture Northern Cape that what must be considered looking forward to the current application is the compounded effect of not only the 36% increase sought, the regulatory clearing account of another 4%, but also the 11% and 9% in the 2 outer years of the cycle, which in our view they are correct in saying that this would mean another increase of about 63%. So that would mean in excess of 60% in the past 5 years and in excess of 60% in the next 3 years. And that must indicate in itself practical unaffordability and unreasonableness on the part of Eskom. Then, Chair, I want to quickly deal with 2 aspects around the, let's say, the nuts and bolts of the figures. The first is the 4% application for the regulatory clearing account, which we find highly problematic. We're of the view that NERSA must consider whether the previous calculation for projected costs and income was reasonable. We're of the view that it wasn't. The 2% drop in sales was always foreseeable given the solar industry growth, and therefore it's not fair to paying customers to burden them now with an additional 4% retrospectively. We're also of the view that NERSA must take into account in dealing with this matter that there is ironically an 8 billion, the 8 billion Eskom wants to recuperate through the RCA, an 8 billion present in its own financial statements of fruitless and wasteful expenditure. So that would mean that there was no need really for RCA, would it have prevented the wastage. Then lastly, we are of the view that before NERSA can seriously look into approving this application, Eskom must be asked to put on the table the steps it has taken to practically ensure that the municipal debt, and you referred to it in your introductory remarks, Chairperson, is managed and is not allowed to balloon and grow in the 2 outer years to the 200 billion that some already foresee. We remind NERSA of the fact that Eskom in 2022 boasted about a Supreme Court of Appeal victory against the Free State municipality Letsemeng, ultimately confirming the fact that both in terms of the equitable share, there is an obligation to pay immediately upon receival, and that in terms of payment plans and support from National Treasury to struggling municipalities for debt, there is an obligation to immediately pay. We say that before this application can be seriously considered by NERSA, Eskom must come and show the steps it has taken, consultations with National Treasury, the Finance Ministry, to try and see ways and means to ensure prompt payment upon receipt of the equitable share. Thank you.
Chairperson, my input comes from the the public hearings that the Democratic Alliance has undertaken to find out what the people of this country and the Free State in particular are feeling about the proposed increases by ESCOM. I can share with you, Chair, that the DA has been able to bring together more than 200,000 petitions. And those people say in those petitions is that should this request be adhered to, then they will have to choose either to buy food or to buy electricity. They are saying to yourselves as NERSA, as and when you look into the proposal, please be reminded that in the Free State in particular, the unemployment rate stands at 32.9%. And that, as other colleagues have indicated, or citizens of this country has indicated before I spoke, they did indicate that should we not be careful of this thing, then we are pushing more and more people below the bread line. We are making sure that the people of the Free State go to bed hungry. And if we care enough, we'll be able to say to ESCOM, they must do their job properly, they must recoup what they're supposed to recoup, and ensure that they don't come here and request this exorbitant increase from the people that are already struggling. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon all. Thank you, Mr. Chair. To close off and to reiterate and add to my colleagues that have just presented, I think we can all agree that electricity is amongst the most basic and essential municipal services that has become virtually indispensable, especially in urban communities. In fact, a recent released South African Human Research Council report states that the Constitutional Court affirmed electricity provision as a public right. If ESCOM is granted the 36.15% increase in tariff over and above the 4% already approved, it will in essence be terminating electricity to the poor and vulnerable, as it will become unaffordable, thus in contravention of the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act, or PAJA, and Section 33 of the Constitution. This will result in unacceptable living conditions and infringe on the fundamental human rights such as dignity, healthcare, access to clean water, healthy environment, and basic education, all of which rely on electricity. Simply put, South Africans cannot afford this hike. The resulting ripple effect would be catastrophic, forcing families to choose between buying food and paying for electricity. With living costs already high, a 40% rise in electricity would harm the whole of society. As stated by Mr. Hannes de Wet and Mr. Jack Armour from Northern Cape and Free State Agriculture, the operating costs for farmers will become uneconomical and unsustainable. Farmers will have to raise crop and livestock prices, prompting factories and stores to follow suit. Consequently, a meal for a family of 4, costing around 100 Rand at the moment, could rise to 140 to 150 Rand. In addition, those that can will simply find an alternative source of energy, such as solar, gas, or paraffin. ESCOM is pricing itself out of the market. It will be like standing in a bucket and trying to lift yourself up. If ESCOM were a well-managed and accountable state-owned enterprise, the situation would be different. Unfortunately, hundreds of millions of rands have been squandered over the last decade due to irregular expenditures, failed projects, significant losses, and corruption. This issue is compounded by the failure to collect over 90 billion owed to them by ANC-run municipalities. South Africa shouldn't have to bear the costs of their mismanagement. ESCOM needs to realize their promise of investment in alternative energy sources, reducing their reliance on fossil fuels, generating energy, as their presentation indicated today. This will vastly improve the cost on consumables. In addition, they can look at trimming the fat of the already bloated senior manager salary bill, as stated by the Auditor General report. Stop wasting money on failed projects and collect what they owed. I implore you, on behalf of the residents of the Free State in South Africa, please do not grant ESCOM this ludicrous 40% tariff hike request. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've had similar presentations in the different provinces from the DA, but there's one point that we have to get right. There's a part where you talk about an 8 billion rand RCA account that has been approved, and that is correct. But its approval has another leg to it, which is the one of implementation, and that has not been decided. Now, in your speech, you talk about that it makes a 4% increase. Now, on the ESCOM application, page 15 of it, which is the same as the one you have, I'm going to request that in writing you show us as NESA where is this 4% you're talking about. If it's the 8 billion rand, I think we understand it is not going to be implemented, but you keep saying it's 4% that it adds to this. Can you assist us and show us where is it in the application? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We can definitely follow it up in writing, but in I want to say layman's terms, mathematics, we're working on the assumption that 2 billion rand in income for ESCOM represents about a 1% increase in terms of tariffs. And therefore the 8 billion roughly represents a 4% increase. I mean, at the risk of abusing the platform, taking you back to the approval already in place, you stated as NERSA that this is to be recoverable from either standard tariff customers, special pricing arrangements, or international customers. And that in itself, if one carefully looks at it in our view, means that this inevitably will be cascading down to household and business consumers, given the fact that special pricing arrangements in our view is just another term for negotiated price arrangements, which we all know is vital to the economy and which is also to an extent a fixed term arrangement. And then similarly in respect of international customers, we can't really see that the agreement with our neighboring countries will leave any room for ESCOM to recuperate what it's lost in country from those consumers. So in that sense, we strongly of the view that it ultimately in real terms represent an increase for those paying customers in households and businesses in country. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your response. I have no further questions. Thank you for your inputs, and for that written request, we would allow you 7 days to provide us with that. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take a biological break. The time now is 11:05 or 11:06. Can we be promptly back at 11:25? Thank you. Colleagues, dames and hearers, ladies and gentlemen, manene and manegas, can we settle down? And just before we start, I think the next presenter I have is from the Freedom Front Plus, Mr. Tamarin Briet. If you could be ready, but just before we start, I'd like Mr. Hopi to just make an announcement around the logistics and the lunch. Hopi.
Good morning. Please note that you will not be allowed to eat without your meal vouchers. So when we break for lunch, I'll be waiting outside to give you your meal vouchers. Thank you.
Thank you, Hopi. Colleagues, we are now on the next presenter. May I ask Mr. Tamarin Briet? Ms. Briet, may you please raise your right hand and affirm, do you solemnly declare that the evidence you are going to give is the truth and the whole truth?
I do.
Thank you. For the record, please state your name. Mr. Mabunda, you are disturbing the oath.
I'm sorry. My name is Tamarin Brett. I'm the Deputy Chairperson of the Freedom Front Plus in the Free State and a Member of Parliament in the National Council of Provinces for the party.
Thank you, Ms. Brett. Once you've finished sorting out yourselves with Mr. Mabunda, you can start with your presentation.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Chairperson. And I think a lot has been said today about the details, about the record, about how it will impact the statistics of farmers and of our communities. So I'm going to move away from that a bit and propose the solutions we have. But I will also try and be as brief as possible without being too vague and cryptic. I would like to start off with an analogy, and the farmers need to forgive me. I'm going to make the analogy in English, but using terms in English for farming is quite difficult, so I had to I had to work around it. But the analogy is that a councillor of mine uses, and it is about a farmer that has 100 heads of cattle. 50 of those cattle are milk-producing cattle and at that stage, and the other 50 cattle are calves and bulls and non-milk-producing cows. The farmer must feed all 100 of these cows at a great cost to him, yet he only makes money from the 50 that consistently gives milk. Yes, he can slaughter a few for meat and sell that off, but that at the end of the day is not his primary business. The cost of the feed goes up, and he now has to produce more milk to keep the books balancing. Now, instead of milking these 50 cows once a day, he milks these cows twice or 3 times a day. Now, by over milking a cow, and I'm sure the farmers will know it best, you at the end of the day, then jy gebruik die koei op, for lack of a better word. That cow reaches its end of milk producing stage a lot quicker and does not remain in that optimal stage. So basically, your 50 cows that produce milk dries up a lot faster. So initially you would have a gain, but then at the end of the day you would just have more non-milk producing cows and you would have that expenditure. And in my humble opinion, that is what this proposed 36 and somewhat % increase and then the cumulative increase over the next 3 years, as was mentioned by previous speakers, would be. That is what we are going to see with this increased increase. Over the first few months, it will have a greater income. We will address certain issues, but in the long run, you will be overburdening the users, leading to non-payment, illegal connections, and a migration towards alternative energy. A great number of municipalities in South Africa are drowning in debt owed to Eskom. The reasons for non-payment of these accounts differ vastly, but include and are not limited to poor financial planning, non-payment by residents, and worsening economic factors that challenge the South African population. The problem, as I see it, is that we need to get more people to pay for electricity, we need to get rid of illegal connections, and we need to encourage people and businesses that are able and willing to produce their own energy. Firstly, we need to get more prepaid meters installed. In an article by African Arguments, a pan-African digital platform for news and political events, a strong argument for prepaid electricity was made, stating that in a randomized study in Cape Town, it was found that households that used prepaid meters reduced their average consumption by 14%. Other studies in South Africa and Nigeria also suggested that great reductions in energy consumption were seen in households that used prepaid electricity meters, with some cases having shown reductions of up to 50%. This would greatly ease the pressure that our power grid is so often experiences and would reduce the cost of energy supply that Eskom needs to fulfill its obligations as the main energy provider. Whilst it is understandable that some households might not be able to afford the installation of prepaid meters, there are still several ways in which payments can be made directly from the consumers to Eskom, eliminating the possibility that municipalities could collect but not hand over the funds for Eskom services. Eskom has made provision for direct online payments through the online portals that are accessible to anybody who has access to the internet. Eskom also accepts EFT transfers directly from consumers and accepts payments from widely available mobile banking apps. Several third-party services would be able to deliver funds directly from the consumer to Eskom, for example, SnapScan, Zapper, and EasyPay. In truth, there is no good reason why municipalities cannot or will not hand over payments they have collected from consumers to pay Eskom. Should this continue, Eskom is in a very precarious situation, and should they rather consider doing these things to ineffectively cut out the middleman. This would discipline consumers not to use power This would discipline consumers to not use more power than they need, and also simultaneously lower the strain on the grids. Additional funds and premiums in order to fund operational costs. It is critical that we note the huge and adverse impact of illegal power connections are having on Eskom operations. I think it's in the range of 5 billion rand that is wasted every year through illegal connections. Failing to apply ourselves would be negligent on our part, as these illegal connections highly impact the sustainability of Eskom's ability to supply power and has a devastating impact on the financial strain of the utility. This increases the cost of electricity to the compliant consumers who pay, as law-abiding and paying customers bear the financial losses of this problem. It is widely known that besides the billions of rands lost through this energy theft, the network themselves are then destabilized, which in turn creates energy disruptions which have cost South African business owners millions of rands and leave the paying consumers with substandard services. It would be preposterous to simply make these customers who already receive substandard services in many cases pay even more money for shaky energy supply that they are often not receiving, while doing nothing meaningful to halt and prevent the rampant illegal power connections that occur daily on a national scale. It should be glaring obvious that with proper and efficient protection and surveillance that assists in reducing and eventually halting illegal connections altogether, simply increasing electricity tariffs would create a never-ending spiral of increasing unaffordability power supply that will eventually become so unattainable to the South African taxpayer that Eskom will no longer have enough paying customers to make any kind of profit, let alone have enough funding to continue supplying South Africa of electricity. This is an inevitable doomsday scenario if a vastly different approach is not taken soon. Furthermore, much more needs to be done by NERSA to prove that the tariff hike it is proposing is lawful, as a ruling by the High Court of South Africa, the Gauteng Division in Pretoria, recently ruled the following in the case of the South African Local Government Association and other versus AfriForum. Chair, I'm sure you know of it, with regards to the methodology of determining electricity tariff increases. The court declared NERSA's methodology for approving electricity tariffs as unlawful and therefore invalid. It found that NERSA had fundamentally fallen short of not insisting that tariff increases be based on cost of supply studies as provided for both in the Electricity Pricing Policy and the Electricity Regulation Act. The court emphasized that NERSA had departed from what was incumbent upon it in terms of the law as enjoyed by the Electricity Regulation Act, which explicitly dictates adherence to the policy requiring cost of supply studies. In 2024, methodology dispensed with the requirement, hence tariff increases derived therefrom were wrongly computed. The ruling highlighted the fact that end users were being over-invoiced for electricity supplies, a product that is becoming increasingly unaffordable, while municipalities were increasing their tariffs without basing such increases on valid cost studies, thus placing financial burdens on consumers. It has become very clear that Eskom throughout the years is battling to supply South Africans with reliable, consistent and affordable energy. This is completely understandable with complicating factors such as the South African population's growth that is fast outpacing the availability of all sorts of resources and the inability of the South African government to prevent the vast amount of daily energy theft taking place on a national scale. This being said, it should also be evident that there exists a multitude of alternate solutions for Eskom's struggles to keep up with the electricity demands, other than NERSA pushing for yet another unreasonable tariff hike. NERSA should be focusing on making it easier for energy supplying competitors to enter the market. It isn't that there aren't any competitors who are willing to take up the challenge of competing with Eskom to supply South Africans with more and stable, cost-effective energy sources, but rather that state-created entities like NERSA are creating too many unnecessary hurdles for these IPPs to take a seat at the table through unnecessary complicated licensing processes, policies that are too restrictive, financial barriers, and a lack of any meaningful push for assistance to these prospective companies that hold so much potential to greatly ease the financial and structural burdens of both the South African public and Eskom as a state-owned enterprise. What is even more clear is that the last avenue that NERSA should even be considering, or Eskom rather, is making South Africans pay even more for electricity when yet another price hike will do absolutely nothing to address the cause behind it, and so many other viable and attainable solutions exist. Lastly, Chairperson, let me conclude by saying this. I think it be pertinent that we look at not only the debt of municipalities to Eskom and also state departments to Eskom, but also what Eskom owes in outstanding rates and taxes to certain municipalities. I cannot remember that exact figure, but it is in the area of millions of rands. So I think there needs to be a workaround, and there needs to be looked at that in order to address the challenge of finances that Eskom is facing. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Britt. Ms. Britt, there's just one thing that you've mentioned at the beginning of your presentation. Are you proposing that municipal customers who are on prepaid pay directly to Eskom rather than paying to the municipality? Did I get you right?
Yes, that is that at the end of the day, we find barriers specifically with those municipalities that are, shall we call it, our regular offenders, to find an alternate way, because at the end of the day, we are seeing that our prepaid customers are paying to municipalities, but municipalities aren't paying to Eskom, so we need to bridge that gap.
Thank you. Ms. Britt, thank you very much for your input. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to move on to our next presentation. Our next presentation is from Bushabelo Unemployed Movement. I've got two names, Ms. Thandi Wechaga and Mweketsi Diba. Please switch on the mic and raise your right hand to affirm. Do you solemnly declare that the evidence you are going to give is the truth and the whole truth?
I do.
Thank you. For the record, please state your name and your position in the organization you're representing. Thank you.
My name is Mweketsi Diba from Botshabelo Unemployed Movement. I'm a spokesperson of the movement. Thank you.
Thank you. May we have Ms. Chaka. Ms. Chaka, please raise your right hand and affirm. Do you solemnly declare that the evidence you are going to give is the truth and the whole truth?
I do.
Thank you. For the record, please state your name and your position at Bushabelo Unemployed Movement.
My name is Thandi Wechaga. I'm a deputy chairperson of the movement.
Thank you. You can proceed in whatever order you want to present. Thank you.
Re leboha chairperson ka monyetla e le re fang one re le Botshabelo Unemployed Movement. Today re bona re utlwa bohloko. We are so disappointed to NERSA by bringing this public hearing in this place. You must be ashamed of yourself, NERSA. My question is, there was no better community institution where you will bring these public hearings to. From me, this is private hearing, because it is far away from our people. But let us get on the business of the day. I am representing the following movements in the Free State. Setsoto local municipality. Fezile Dabi, we are representing African Revolution Forum in Motaga local district. In Harib region, we are representing Kofi Fontaine Unemployed Movement in Letsime local municipality. In Lejweli Putswa, we are representing Bronville Unemployed Women's Forum in Machabe. Mangaung, we are representing Botshabelo Unemployed Movement. We are representing Motewo Advanced Health Movement under the umbrella of Assembly of the Unemployed, in the banner of Cry of the Excluded. We, the mentioned organization, strongly opposes ESCOM proposed exorbitant electricity tariff increase. In Sesotho, when we are saying we strongly oppose, re swela ka mathe ha re hloke ESCOM e teng mona ba utlwe hore taba ene ba tlang ka yone ho NERSA hore NERSA ba batla hore ba nyolle tjhelete, rona re le mekgatlo e boletsweng mona re swela ka mathe taba eo. This is not merely an issue of numbers and percentages. It's a matter of survival of millions of South Africans. In the coming financial year, ESCOM plans to increase tariffs for direct customers by approximately 36%. And if that isn't enough, they intend to raise these tariffs by another 12% in the 2027 financial year, followed by an additional 9% in 2028. This percentage may sound technical, but in real terms, they spell devastation for the poor working class. Underlying ESCOM's request for a tariff increase is a structural problem. We know this is a man-made problem, ESCOM, arising from the adoption of the full cost recovery model and user pays principle. The implication is that ESCOM is a public utility that must operate on the same basis as any other private company. It has been corporatized. The Electricity Regulation Act doubled down on the principle that electricity tariffs must be set at a level that is cost effective and inclusive of a reasonable rate of return, high enough to ensure continued private investment and funding. The consequences of this is that the utility is dependent on selling electricity to raise revenue in order to recover its cost. South Africa is the most unequal country in the world. Like I said before, those who don't have, they don't give enough chance to voice out their concern. We know, ESCOM, you are in one blanket with NERSA. That is why NERSA concluded to come in this hotel. So millions of South Africans are without a stable income. Many survive through informal or unstable jobs, where a steady monthly salary is a luxury, not a guarantee. Most people are already unable to afford rising tariffs. This problem is exacerbated by the increased privatization electricity in the country and drive for a competitive energy market. The private sector is interested in maximizing profits, which means even high tariffs are at the expense of ensuring the people's essentials are not met. These hikes will only serve to continue to exclude the majority of South Africa from being provided with decent services. It will also increase energy poverty and deepen inequality in the country. Already families are forced to choose between electricity and food. What's more, these tariff increases will not solve ESCOM's deeper issues. They are temporarily fixed, a bandage on a wound that requires a surgery. Without reversing the corporatization of ESCOM and ending the full cost recovery model, along with ensuring greater transparency and accountability, we can expect that tariffs will continue to rise. The rollout of free basic electricity has had a limited success in reducing the impact of rising tariffs. Millions are excluded from receiving free basic electricity by municipalities that are reliant on selling services and therefore are disincentivized from registering indigent households that are eligible for free basic services. In addition to the millions being excluded, the amount of 50 kWh of electricity per household per month is completely inadequate to meet people's needs to live a decent life. It is estimated that households requires at least 350 kilowatt per household per month. When we bring it into a rand value, When you buy 1,000 electricity, you get 300 kilowatts. Think about those who are depending on this insult of 350 by President Ramaphosa, SRD. Now, you, ESCOM, you want to increase. It is unjust to expect South Africans, particularly those who are unemployed or live in poverty, to pay for a problem that will persist regardless of how much they are asked to sacrifice. We are deeply concerned for the well-being of the majority of the people in the country, especially the millions of energy-poor South Africans who do not have safe, affordable, and reliable access to services, including electricity. We call government to do the following. Number one, to fix ESCOM and not privatize electricity. Impose stricter oversight on ESCOM operations and ensure transparency in their financial dealings. Ensure municipality provides at least 350 kilowatts of free basic electricity to eligible households. Invest in renewable energy infrastructure. South Africa has an abundance of sunlight and wind. In conclusion, we call on every South African to stand with us. This is our fight. We must demand that ESCOM and government put people before profit. We know ESCOM e beile profit ka pele, e be ya batho ka morago. Ke ka ho today ba le mona ba tlo kopanela hore e eketse tšhelete ya bona. Ene ra tseba ESCOM ho etsahalang manyofonyofo kampo yone corruption e ka hara ESCOM ke yone e ba qobelang hore ba tle mona ba tlo kopa tšhelete hore NERSA e okeletse ESCOM tšhelete. Empa he re utlwile presentation ya bone mari dikopo tsa rona ke tsena hore ntwa ena ke ya rona. ESCOM must prioritize sustainable energy and find ways to address its challenges without punishing those who are already suffering. Amandla.
Thank you, Comrade Diba. As Assembly of the Unemployed, Cry of the Excluded, and the organization that Tate Diba has been mentioned, we find this as brutal attack of ESCOM and NERSA on the poor and the working class. The war has been started, waged against the unemployed people and the working class of South Africa by raising the electricity prices. The brutal conflict that NERSA and ESCOM are involved in has worsened the situation of the unemployed. Sorry for that. Okay. I forgot where I was now. Okay. The brutal conflict that NERSA and ESCOM are involved has worsened the situation of the poor in the first place. It is clear that the government, led by ANC organization, is anti-poor and anti-unemployed, but it's on the side of the rich. We condemn ESCOM and their implementation of load shedding stage, neither be stage 2 nor 6. South Africans can't be held reason by implementing of neoliberalism policies, e.g. austerity. Because everything is because of austerity. Education is safara, health is safara. Even now, the poor people have to suffer because of it. We should not forget that poor working class families are left without food due to broken fridges, businesses are lost stock and customers because of this war against them. We also believe that this is a human rights violation that has been looked at for so long. The following reason shows how NERSA has failed to protect the poor and the working class. According to the rules of NERSA, it is obliged to make decisions when the prices of electricity increased in the interest of the public. But this is not happening because most of people in South Africa do not work much, women and young people. This decision made for the rich because they are the ones who benefit from the increase of these electricity charges. South African economic policy of reducing budget allocation in key sectors. If the government can continue with the poor and the working class, will have their lives at risk. The failure to the government to implement the solar and the wind power generation plans is a big problem for the workers. As Ntate Aile Abua from NUMSA, we la bua ka taba ya hore batho ba bangata ba tla loser mesebetsi ya bona. Mare ha ke le mo eo yona ine ile statement sa hae. Currently, when unemployed people are facing the slaughter of rich people's cabals, and the ANC organization, Botshabelo Unemployed Movement calls the government to implement the basic income grant. The basic income grant plan with a demand of 1.5. And Ntate also mentioned that this 36% ha ile kane le tšhelete le 350 eo ile reng hore batho ba ifumana be le reng ha ba sebetse e ngata lo e feta. So ka ho ha motho a sa sebetseng a ka se kgone hore a reke motlakase wa kgwedi kaofela. O ka mo sustain only for a week. Hobane no ha re reka motlakase wa 10 rand ke only 3 units. Ibile 3 units e ngata ba bang ba fumana 2.8. So re tlo survive jwang re le batho ba sa sebetseng ha ile hore dintho di ntse di increase jwalo empa re sena matla re le ko jwana di mahetleng. The unemployed and the poor cannot afford this increase, and we are saying to this time for a change, the working class must organize themselves for revolutionary and total change. Amandla! I submit.
Are you adding? You are out of your 15 minutes, but I will allow you to continue if you want to add.
We are done.
You are done?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for your input, sir. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to move on to our last speaker for the day before we get ESCOM to come back and respond and address some of the issues that have been raised. I have 2 names that were given to me. It is Smakaleng Kupane and Thato Ndlovu. Is it Miss Kopane? Yes.
Smakalem Patricia Kopane.
Okay. Please raise your right hand and affirm, do you solemnly declare that the evidence you are going to give to this is as the truth and the whole truth?
I do.
Thank you for the record. Please state your name and your position at Action SA.
My name is Smakalem Patricia Kopane. I'm the provincial chairperson of Action SA in the Free State.
Thank you, Ms. Kopane. Mr. Thato Ndlovu, please raise your right hand and affirm, do you solemnly declare that the evidence you are going to give to this panel, the evidence you are going to give is the truth and the whole truth?
I agree, sir.
Thank you for the record. Please state your name and your position at Action SA.
My name is Thato Ndlovu, the current deputy chairperson of Action SA student chapter at UFS.
Thank you. Ms. Kopane, you can go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Chairperson, for the opportunity. A lot have been said by the previous speaker. I don't want to repeat what they said. But it is very interesting while we were discussing this critical issue. And I look at the program and I realize there's only 3 political parties today that are doing the presentation. So one is asking yourself, is this not an important issue? What happened to the other political parties as those who are in government? Why are they not here? Many times we hear them talking about our people, but they are not here to represent their own people. And secondly, Chair, I just want to share the same sentiment with the previous speaker from Bosabelo Unemployment Group. They mentioned about the venue where this public hearing is taking place. I was also concerned about the venue because this is a public hearing, and the people who will be affected or who are affected by these increased tariffs, they are the people who are very poor. Currently, we are having about 32.6% of people that are poor, that are not here. So for us, we really see that for choosing this venue, it's really demonstrating a blatant disregard to the people who are supposed to be here. Some of the people are supposed to come from the Northern Cape. How do you expect a person who's unemployed from the Northern Cape to travel 120 kilometers to be here? Even the people of Mangaung that you see them here, they've been buzzed to come here. It is not fair. The people who are really affected, they're in the township. I think maybe it would have changed your perception as NESA and ESCOM. When you make the decision about increasing the tariffs, you go to the real township. You see when we talk about poverty. Here we are talking about numbers. We are under a well-ventilated area. But the reality, people, they don't even have something to eat on the table while we are discussing about their own future. Of which, as actually say, we feel that exclusion, it is not only impractical, but it is deeply insulting, especially for the people of Northern Cape, 1.4 million of them that are poor who cannot even come here. It is deeply unjust that the people of the Free State also, they are not here. And we know that there is a problem with our economy that is not growing. This public hearing, Chairperson, is happening at the time when our economy is not growing. Let's be honest. We just come, the Minister of Finance, he was making his speech during the medium-term budget, where he clearly says that the National Treasury, they have forecasted that the economy of our country, it is going to grow at 1.1%. But half of the term, it is only 0.4%. Currently, our own, they also projected that 3 years to come, that is the National Treasury, our economy can only grow 3 years to come in 1.8%. But this is in contrast with emerging markets, even the developing countries as us, that are growing at 4.2%. So it is obvious that South Africa, our economy, it is not growing to make sure that they create jobs. But unemployment is becoming deeper, poverty is becoming deeper. It is a reality. It is not just a statistics. Chairperson, the persistent electricity tariffs increase, compounded by the economy that is not growing, it clearly shows that unemployment, we are pushing our people to be more poorer and poorer every day. It is a reality. Over and above, ESCOM outrageous, request of 36.15% tariff hike from our customer is unaffordable. NESA's decision also to allow ESCOM to recover an additional 8 billion that you were asking the other political party that was here, 8 billion from its regulatory clearing account will result in additional 4% that will increase this tariffs in 2025, bringing the total increase to 4% to 40% next year. This combined increase will further devastating already the struggling household and making the basic electricity and unaffordable luxurious for so many millions of people in South Africa. If you remember very well, during COVID, many of the upcoming business, they are struggling even now. So which means the tariffs increase is going to cause a strain on those business, even the agriculture. I'm happy the agriculture people are here. They've presented their case. We can hear from them how is it going to affect even the agriculture sector, and also weakening the fragile economy, like I've already indicated. Let me remind ESCOM or NESA, if you remember very well, between 2007 and 2022, ESCOM tariffs increased more than 4.5 times, while the inflation rose by just over 1.25 times. And this demands that this planned tariff increase, definitely it must be scrapped with immediate effect. It's unaffordable, it's an insult to the people of South Africa. And as Action SA, we are committed to fighting for an energy system that is more affordable, stable, and sustainable at the same time. Action SA, we believe that the decentralization of the energy market, it must be done. How? By capacitating and empowering the municipalities to develop the microgrids and renewable energy projects that will reduce the reliance only on ESCOM as a source of energy, and promote a competition amongst the independent power producers, diversify the energy supply. Here in the Free State, I can mention many municipalities. Malutia Pofung, I don't know how many times ESCOM you try to attach the assets of that municipality when you try to recover what is being owed to you. Malutia Pofung, they owe more than 5 billion. So many municipalities, they are struggling to pay. It is unfortunate for those loyal South African people who are trying to pay, but at the end of the day, they are going to become the victim of these increased tariffs. So the problem of also in the municipality that there is also inaccurate billing, that is also a severe problem. It's not only affecting the consumer, but at the end of the day, it affected the revenue collection. So this application by ESCOM, definitely as Action SA, we feel that is really not affordable. It must be scrapped. It's an insult to people of South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you.
Protocol observed. As a young black person who's currently coming from KZN under an unprivileged family, I vehemently disagree with this motion that is being promoted by NERSA and ESCOM. We are young South Africans who are trying to make it by all means to be far more better in life. Says, can you kindly just answer this question for me? Can you cut off 40% of your monthly salary as a budget? We are young students who are depending on ELS funds. whereby you get 1,650 and it's 1,680 after deductions. How can you expect me as a black person to carry 40% from this amount? As a black person, we are coming from very, very, very most unprivileged backgrounds. We found out that in South Africa, there are most grandmothers who got 8 or 9 grandchildren who depend on that financial incentives. Can my grandmother cut off her budget just because of her ESCOM mass benefits at the end of the day? ESCOM and NESA, another thing, do you understand that each and every time when tariffs increases, university fees also increases? Do you understand that each and every time when tariff increases, our landlords in our accommodation, our rents increases? How about those students who are non-funded by NSFAS due to unforeseen circumstances? Will you guys go and negotiate on their own behalf on their landlords, make it a point that there are some financial support for them? Will you guys go there and make it a point that our brothers and sisters do not suffer from this motion that you are proposing to us? How sure are you that you guys, after you've collected all of this revenue, you're gonna use it wisely? How many times we've seen the ESCOM officials who are being come forward and they told us that most of our state's expenses have been exploited. Each and every year on SAPCs, we found that most of the CEOs of ESCOMs, they usually resign. Why? It's exploitation of resources. 40% on that budget cuttage is unnecessary at all. Increase in tariffs in higher education is like a disease to us each and every year as students. You must come here in Bloemfontein, mind you, I'm traveling to KZN 4 hours, and I must come in here in Bloemfontein to study. How am I gonna pass if maybe I still have to worry about myself? Small businesses usually tell us that as the young people, you should be innovative and come up with business-minded ideas. How about if maybe I'm starting as a young citizen, trying to find it with a 150 rand capital to start at the poultry with 3 chickens or hens? You know that chickens need electricity for them to grow well. How do you expect me to cut 40% from this 150? Please guys, can you please go back and revise this policy? Because in South Africa, we usually said that we are a democratic country, but South Africa is like a capitalist country. You officials, you only care for your own pockets. Mind you, your children study abroad. You don't have any children that's using the public institutions. I thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kupana, I'm going to request the same thing I requested from the other presenter. This 4% that you're talking about, that is increasing the price to 40%, can you give us this in writing and really locate it in the application that we have? To guide you in the application that's been publicized, it's on page 15. Can you show us where is this 4% you're talking about in that and even in the subsequent years? I don't think that there's any other additional question for clarity for me from you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Chairperson, for asking that questions. But we have the same answer as the other political party that were here. But if you want that in writing, we'll definitely going to do it in writing.
Thank you. We will await that within the next 7 working days from today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of our list of presenters, but there is also a presenter which was a member of the public, Marcel. I've just been given an email from him where he's indicating that he's based in Furisberg and 250 kilometers from here, so he could not attend, and has requested that we read the email, but I was not forwarded the email. So on that note, I am going to then request ESCOM to make the closing remarks as the applicant, and we will proceed from there. Mr. Naga.
Good afternoon, everyone, again. In conclusion, it's just important to reiterate a few things. The first thing is that ESCOM's application is made in accordance with the Electricity Regulation Act and the prevailing multi-year pricing determination. Important is that the key drivers for ESCOM's application is to enable the strategic role that ESCOM plays in the electricity sector. It's to ensure that efficient costs are recovered and a fair return is paid to ESCOM. It's about migrating towards a return on asset to its weighted average cost of capital over time, and it's striving to not be dependent on the fiscus or the state. Now for ESCOM to be financially viable, it needs cost reflectivity at the revenue level and at the tariff level. It needs balance sheet support from the government, and it needs to collect the revenue that it sells or the electricity it bills. Now, ESCOM is receiving debt support, and this will be received until the first year of its MYPD6 application, so only year one. This then falls away. So this was to address historical shortfalls for sustainability. Historically, the tariffs did not increase at required levels. So post this debt relief or debt support, ESCOM needs to stand on its own feet. With regards to the arrear debt, there was a question asked about, or there were a few questions asked about the arrear debt. ESCOM is not empowered currently to address the recovery from the municipalities. This continues to remain a major challenge for us. the National Treasury has implemented a debt support program for the Munichs, but in truth that has not been effective. Chairperson, I think there was a request from the public as well as yourself. We will in a future session make a presentation on detail in terms of the things that ESCOM has done to try and recover the debt from the municipalities. And in conclusion, and lastly, Chairperson, ESCOM has considered the affordability of consumers. And measures like, as an example, the FPE need to be properly implemented for low-income households to have access to affordable electricity. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Mr. Naga. Mr. Naga, thank you. I do not have follow-up questions from you. I will expect to get the questions that we had asked and the responses in writing with the necessary detail. Thank you for your participation. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at the end of this public hearing. First, I'd like to thank all of you for attending this, despite the complaints and the issues that have been raised. And I think when I also indicated, I'm not sure what the hand is for, but I'm going to hear from Mr. Mabunda. Excuse me, sir. I think when I gave an indication of what's going to happen, if you want your question to be considered, you are going to write it and give it to Mr. Mabunda. At this point, I am unable to take your hand from the floor. Mr. Mabunda will take your question in writing. Members, we are going to deal with your questions after this. I'm going to close the official public hearing, and I think ESCOM is here to listen to you and address your questions. But I think when we have hearings, we have certain rules This is a hearing that's been afforded by the National Energy Regulator to hear your inputs. I think if there are other hearings that are required, we will have to find other ways of dealing with that. And I think we have been, sir, I think you must drop your hand. I'm not going to take your hand. I said I will attend to you. When I have closed the hearing, I will attend to you. Thank you. We have listened to you. You have stressed the points about the venues and other things that must be there. And I think I had to mention to you that the gentleman from Fouriersburg also wanted that the public hearing must be held in Fouriersburg. So I think as we agree on how we are going to deal with this, I think we're going to have to use other methods that are also going to be considered economic, strategic, and important rather than having a hearing. And I think your inputs, as well required by the law, we have to consider the inputs from affected parties before we make a decision. And they don't have to be given like we're having. There are all social media and many other things, and the process for gathering inputs is still open. It will close when we have made the decision. For now, we will still have your inputs. So I'd like to thank you for you know, in other venues that we go to, these hearings get disrupted and we get chased out of the room for many other reasons. So let me thank the people from Free State for not chasing us out and telling us what they thought we needed to hear without chasing us out, because chasing us out does not enable you to put your grievances. We have listened, and I think the important part about the listening is not the fact that we have listened, we have heard what you have said. And I think as we go forward and make the decisions within the confines and the boundaries of the legislation that governs us, we will take that into consideration. We are required by law to balance the conflicting requirements. ESCOM wants to be sustainable. Consumers want to pay what they consider appropriate and no increases. Investors on the other side want to get their returns if they put money into the system. All of those conflicting requirements are requirements that we are required by law to consider. And that, as we make the decision, we will do. This hearing is adjourned, and I will then ask the members who are going to have lunch to collect their vouchers or goodies from Hopi outside. Thank you for your time and thank you for your participation. I noticed 2 hands from the 2 gentlemen, and I